Hello, Keith Rucker here at VintageMachinery.org. Guys, today I'm working on the Diresta Bandsaw project, and today I think what we're going to work on is pouring some Babbitt bearings down for our bottom shaft. Now, we've already done a lot of work to kind of get ready for this. We've already made a brand new shaft because the old one we had to replace for various reasons. If you watch the episodes or the series here so far, you'll know what I'm talking about. But we've got that built. We've already got some holders, some little brackets or fixtures made to hold that shaft to get it in the proper position when we pour these bearings. And now we're to the point where we're ready to actually pour the Babbitt bearings. Now, before we get into Babbitt, I always get a lot of questions on this, and I don't always have people who've watched a lot of my older videos where I've talked about it. But number one, what are Babbitt bearings? So back in the day, before the modern ball bearings like we use now, we used Babbitt metal, which was kind of a frictionless or a low friction metal that was used for a bearing material. Now, the original Babbitt was mostly a tin-based product. It had a lot of tin in it. It had some other elements in there as well. As time went on, they went to more of or started using more of a lead-based product, which was they often called frictionless metal. It's still referred to by many people as Babbitt. Technically, Babbitt is the tin-based material, but in all reality, all these frictionless metals kind of get lumped under the heading of Babbitt. So with Babbitt bearings, you just have that metal in there, a softer metal that the shaft rides on. You have oil that drips down on it. You have some scraping marks in there for the oil to kind of be able to reside in. And basically what happens under an ideal situation is that shaft is just turning on a film of oil. And it actually is a pretty good bearing material. The upside of the Babbitt bearings is they're fairly low tech. You can pour them in your own shop. Doesn't require ordering a specific bearing. You just melt the old stuff out, pour new stuff in when it needs to be replaced. If they are properly maintained, they hold up extremely well. Some of the problems with them often is people not lubricating them properly or not lubricating them at all, or lubricating them with grease, which is a no-no. You should always lubricate Babbitt bearings with oil, a lightweight oil, and not grease. Very often you'll see where people have put grease zerks into the oil holes and have gone to a grease type setting. That will ruin a Babbitt bearing very quickly. So anyway, they can produce a very accurate service, and the Babbitt is still being used today, although in most applications we've switched over to ball bearings. But in some applications, particularly really large applications or applications that have a lot of pounding in them in that shaft, Babbitt bearings are still used today. Even in engines, they were still used, like on your crankshafts, on your piston rods and stuff like that. That metal that's on those little sleeves is a Babbitt type material. So anyway, enough on that. Let's get in here and get started on this Babbitt pour and get this bottom shaft re-poured and ready to roll. So first things first, I want to start by kind of getting some prep work done to this bearing shell. So we've got cast into the frame itself this area down here. This is where the Babbitt will actually pour into. Now, I sent this saw off, had it sandblasted. They primed it, and when they primed it, of course, they primed all the inside of this. I want to try to get as much as that old paint and primer out. We've also done some body filling on this, and I got some little areas here where we've got some drips on there, where we've got some body filler just kind of gotten down here. I'm going to try to get this cleaned out as well as I can and down to bare metal. I'm just going to use an angle grinder with a wire wheel on it, and I'm not going to sit here and bore you guys to death with watching this, but I just wanted to kind of show you what we're going to do. All right, that didn't take too long, but we got that cleaned up. We got all that primer out of there down to bare metal. Got all rust, anything else that's in there out. That will really help that Babbitt to stick to that material in there without any problems. Also note these little holes that are drilled in the side here. These are locating holes for the Babbitt to go into. What happens when we cast this, when we pour the Babbitt in there, it'll go up into these little tabs, and that'll kind of help lock it in there and keep that Babbitt from spinning in this shell. In some cases, if you have a really smooth shell, there's a process called tinning where you can actually put a thin layer of another metal in there to create a better bond for the Babbitt to go to. In my experience, when you got these little tabs in here, it's really not necessary to have to tin your base metal down here. Some people do it anyway, but I typically don't in this situation. These should be plenty fine. We're pretty much ready to continue on with our prep process. With these Babbitt bearings, we're going to have a bottom bearing and then we'll have a top half, and these will separate and basically just clamp down on there with a gasket or a shim in between these two where you can take it out as it wears and tighten it up if necessary. But one thing I want to point out here is if you look on the bottom of this top casting, notice that this casting is cored out, and basically we've only got bearing from here to here, and from here to here there's an opening in the middle. And we want to, when we cast these bearings, obviously we're only going to cast the front and the back. And the same thing on the bottom here, and this is the way it was when it was made. There was basically an area in between here where there was nothing. It was just an empty area, and that's actually an area where oil can kind of collect and create a reservoir in there that will kind of self-lubricate that shaft over time. So I put some marks on here, just some Sharpie pens to kind of show where my bearings need to come to. Basically just kind of past this key and just past this key. I'm not sure why they put keys in the center because they're not really used, but that's the way they were. No big deal. What we're going to do to fill in this area so that the metal doesn't just pour in there is we will use a damming material and just put it up underneath the shaft, and that will kind of just keep that area where it won't go in there. So that's kind of my next step. We're going to do that now. Now the damming material that I'm going to be using is this product here called Deacon Mold Pack. And when you take the lid off of this, it is kind of got fibrous material. No, it does not have asbestos in it. Back in the old days, they used to have an asbestos-based product that was commonly used for this. But this is a little bit fire retardant. It's moldable. You can see it's very pliable where you can kind of mold it to whatever shape you want, but it is heat resistant, heat tolerant, and can take the heat of us doing the Babbitt bearings. What I'm going to do is kind of roll some of this out and kind of put it in this area. We'll put the shaft down on it and get a good fit and leave that in there. And again, it's just going to take up space and prevent the metal from going in there. It's for creating a dam when you are pouring Babbitt bearings, or at least that's how I'm using it here. Now you can buy this stuff off the internet. It's rather expensive, but if you pour a lot of bearings like I do, it's good to have this stuff around. They used to use a product called Babbitt Right. I used to use that all the time. It's no longer available. Can't get it anymore. I really like that product, but this is kind of a good replacement for it. I've got a bed of this down at the bottom, and I put a little thicker kind of pieces on either side of this because it's really not touching the shaft all the way in there, taking up most of the space. But this little seal here should seal it up. I'm going to go ahead now and drop my shaft in there, and we'll just kind of fit it in there, hopefully. I've got my shaft. I got these little spacers here that will index it at the proper height. And I'm just going to kind of push that down in there and let it mold to that shaft. And that should perform a nice dam in there to position it where we want it to be. Now, one thing I'll note here is on these spacers. We made these in a previous video, and their whole purpose is to get the center of the shaft roughly on the center here, so that it's not below center or really above center. It's right on the center, which is where I want it. The top half will then fit on top of this. We'll pour a separate casting on that. So these are here. They're just kind of sitting up on this shelf, so to say, and that's going to position everything in there. The other thing these caps do is they kind of block the end of this bearing, and that's going to serve as most of the dam, although we will pour some additional, or put some additional material around this, the Babbitt, right, or the damming material, to make sure nothing runs out the ends. All right, I think we got the shaft pretty well fitted. What I'm going to do is we're going to pull it out, and I want to blacken this shaft with some soot off of my acetylene torch, and that will just kind of help the shaft release, also give a little bit of a space in between there so that it's not too tight. Once it cools and shrinks, we don't have to do quite as much scraping. So with that, I'm going to see, I'm going to kind of mark on here roughly the area that I need to blacken, just so that I know when I get over there to do it. I'll just pull that out, and there we go. I've got my oxyacetylene torch over here now, and again, we're just going to blacken this shaft. I'm not really heating it. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn on my acetylene, and I want to get a flame that is really smoking good, kind of like that right there, and we're going to soot this shaft up. We're just going to kind of go back and forth on it, and the soot from the acetylene will transfer over to the shaft, and again, it creates a very nice little bit of a layer between the Babbitt and the shaft, and it's just carbon is all this is, and it kind of helps things to release, and it also, like I said, gives a little bit of a space in there. I'm going to roll that over, and we're just going to go all the way around that shaft and soot it up real good. All right, I think that's good. And we'll go over here and put the shaft back in place. Got carbon black floating through the air over here, but all right. All right, we'll get that shaft positioned just right and kind of work that this around it over here. The side that's going to matter the most is going to be the bottom of the shaft, because that's where the Babbitt's going to pour around it. So I think we're pretty good here. Go ahead and kind of push that around there, form it in there real good. Even if we get a little Babbitt that goes up in that area, it'll break out real easily. So we've got two defined areas here where the Babbitt's going to be poured. And now we need to get some damming material around the outsides of these, just to make sure nothing leaks out. And we'll be ready to start heating things up and pouring some Babbitt. Now I'm going to go ahead and start melting my Babbitt. So I've got a little camp stove over here. I've got a pouring ladle that we'll actually pour out of, and in it is some Babbitt. This is actually the Babbitt that we melted out of this machine. And while a lot of times I don't really like reusing Babbitt because I don't know what grade it is or what kind it is, I'm pretty comfortable doing it here. I can tell by looking at this Babbitt that this is a high grade tin based Babbitt. It just has a different look than the lead based Babbitts, and honestly on this bandsaw, lead based Babbitt would be fine anyway, so I'm pretty much just going to reuse it. There's nothing really wrong with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my torch, and we'll get it going here and turn my camp stove on, and I'm just going to go ahead. Usually when I'm doing this, I can get the heat in there to kind of pre-melt this Babbitt a lot faster with the torch. At least get it mostly melted and then let it kind of simmer over here on the stove. You can do it all on the stove. It just takes a little bit longer, but you can see with a little bit of heat, I'm starting to melt that Babbitt down into that ladle. And that's what we're after here. All right, I'm just going to let that just cook over here for a while, get up to temperature. We got some heat in it, so it won't take quite as long. And while that's doing that, we're going to go over here and get the torch and start preheating our casting in preparation for the Babbitt pour. All right, while my Babbitt is warming up over there, I also want to kind of do a preheat on where we're going to be pouring over here. So just for reference, our tin base Babbitt that we're using is going to melt around 800 degrees, give or take 25, 30, 50 degrees, somewhere along in there. It really depends on exactly what's in that alloy, which I don't know. It's really not important. Just kind of giving you some ranges here. And by comparison, aluminum melts at, again, roughly around 1200 degrees, cast iron around 2100 degrees. So, we're not getting anywhere close to the melting temperature of any other materials that is in here. As far as this preheat is concerned, it doesn't have to be 700 degrees. Really, if I can just get it up around 350, something like that, we're fine. We just don't want that metal, when we pour the Babbitt in there, we don't want it cooling too fast and kind of not getting a good even pour. If it solidifies before we get a good liquid pour in there, you get wrinkles in your pour. Sometimes your pour does not completely go all the way around. So, we're not trying to get it to that 700 degrees, just again, around 300 degrees or so. So I'm going to spend a few minutes over here. We got a lot of mass in this casting, so it's going to take a little bit of time to get some heat into it, and that's what we're going to do right now. Now this Babbitt, as it sits here and heats up, you'll see you'll get a little skim on the top, and what that is that's any trash or impurities that's in that metal. And since we did melt this off of the machine, you can pretty well expect you're going to have some junk that kind of came off with it. So what I'm doing is I'm just kind of taking a little stick here and we're raking it to one side, and we're just going to kind of skim this off of there and just get it out, because we don't want to put those impurities back into the bearing. So we'll get this out. The other thing, I like using a little wooden stick for this. This tells you when you're up to temperature. When a pine stick will kind of burst into flames when you stick it in that metal, that is an indication that you are at temperature. And as you can see, we are burning. All right, that is at temperature. We've got it skimmed. It should be ready to pour. I'm gonna put a little bit more heat over here in the casting, and we'll be along in just a minute to do our pour. All right, I'm just going to soak a little bit more heat in here before we actually come over and do our pour. I took a pause there to go skim that Babbitt. So I want to make sure, again, because of the size of this casting, it's basically just a big heat sink right now. So I want to get some good fresh heat on it right before the pour. Notice on the top of that shaft that carbon has burned off. That's just where we're hitting it directly with a torch. We've still got plenty of black on the bottom down there. And I think we're good. All right, let's do our pour. Here we come with our ladle, and we'll just pour right in there. There we go. We'll just let that cool off, and we'll get ready to do the other one. I'm gonna have to melt some more Babbitt to go on the other side. Just about ready for this side. Again, I'm just coming over here and putting a little bit more heat in here right before the pour. I think we're probably good enough as we are, but better to be safe than sorry, I guess. All right, let's pour our Babbitt. Whoops, making a mess. I'm hoping I'm gonna have enough in my ladle for this pour. This side looks a lot thicker than the other side, but I think it's gonna do it. That's gonna kind of shrink down in there. I think what I'm gonna do is, this shrunk down on this side. I'm gonna take the torch and kind of heat that up and kind of liquefy it and top it off. So you don't want to, when you're trying to do this, you don't want to just pour onto that cold Babbitt. What I want to do is I want to create it where it's actually liquid up underneath it, and then pour on top of it so I don't end up with a seam in there. I just need a little bit right there in the middle. I go grab my ladle. Get that liquid again. This is where it's nice to have an extra hand in the shop. There we go. That's all I wanted to do. Just kind of top that off. And with that, we're just going to let this cool down. And we'll be back after a while, pull that shaft out and see what we did. It looks like a good pour to me. I think we're going to be fine. So we'll be back. We let this cool down. Actually, we let it cool down overnight, and it's ready to pull apart. And let's check it out, see how it did. First thing we'll do here is pull this Deacon mold stuff out, and this shaft should just pick up. There we go. And let's see what we got. So this one looks good. This one we got a little issue with. So we went in there and kind of tried to blend in a little bit of this material, and we got a little layer that flaked down in there. I may be able to peel that out. That looks like it didn't fuse. Let me see if I can do that. Let me pull this out. I think we can salvage that. Let's see if that'll come up. I think it's going to. Yeah, I think we're going to be able to get it out. I'm going to have a little bit of some scraping to do over on this one side to kind of level that out, but most of that's going to peel out. I'll get that cleaned up and come back. Yeah. I'm pretty happy with how these turned out. Like I said, we had a little bit of a run over that kind of over here, but I was able to peel most of that out. I'm going to have to do some scraping on these bearings to get them tuned up here toward the end. That'll be a little bit later on, but these are going to work just fine. So next step, what I want to do is we need to get this little bit of metal that's kind of above the surface here filed down. I'm just using an old horseshoe rasp. This cuts that metal pretty good, pretty quick, and we'll just take it right down until it's level with the cast iron up underneath it. And with that, I think we have the bottom bearings pretty much done. Like I said, we do need to go in here and scrape these surfaces, but I'll wait and do that after we pour the top half. And with this, Gracie's going to come over here and inspect this, make sure it's up to her snuff too, it looks like. But up next, what we'll do is we'll actually come in here and pour the top bearings. I'm going to do that in a separate video. It's fairly involved. There's a lot more steps to it. I don't think I can fit it all in one video. So we're going to stop here and bring you back for the top half in a second pour. Notice how these little key plugs filled in here. Again, that will keep that bearing from turning in the shell down here. It's going to lock it in place. So that turned out really good. I kind of cleaned up these edges with a chisel where it kind of ran up into that damming material. The ends were blocked off pretty square with the bushings that we made, so those turned out nice. One thing I'll note, yeah, there's some imperfections in here, but that's fine. We actually are going to be scratching oil grooves in these. We're going to be scraping them to give clearance for oil. Any little surfaces that are below the surface like this, they become oil pockets, and we need those in there anyway, so that's not a big deal at all. These actually turned out really, really nice, so I'm happy with how these look. All right, let's continue on with the top half in another video. More progress on the Jimmy Diresta Bandsaw restoration. Bottom half of the bearing shells poured. We still need to do the top half over there. Like I said, we're going to do that in a separate video. There's some interesting things in there that we're going to have to deal with, and like I said, it's going to take some time. So we're just going to, instead of trying to cram all this into one video, we're just going to do two, I think, on it. It's going to just work with time better and be able to cover things thoroughly. So with that, that is going to be a wrap today. We'll be back out here hopefully soon, get those top bearings poured, get this bottom half of the saw pretty much knocked out, and I got to put some other pieces on here, and I think we'll be ready to start painting it. I want to get the bottom bearings done before we paint it. The top bearing is actually removables from the saw, so we can kind of deal with that separately. That one's going to be a little bit easier, I think, to do. I think we got some repairs we need to do that casting up there first, so we'll be doing that down the road. So making progress, and with that, that will be it, guys. As always, thanks for watching. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Thumbs up, comments, greatly appreciated. Helps out the channel a lot, guys, if you take a few minutes and interact. Give me some comments, give me that thumbs up. It really, really helps out, and I greatly appreciate it if you do that. And hit that bell icon up there to get notifications when new videos are posted. And with that, guys, we'll catch you on the next video. As always, thanks for watching.